This is actually kind of an important video to do for those of us involved in on the teaching and programming side of things when it comes to the martial arts. And although honestly, it's going to be important for people that are searching out their martial arts experience as well. We clearly live in a day and age where pretty much everybody knows, where it's common knowledge, it's standard practice to not be a one-dimensional fighter. People don't generally stick with one style. They might still have a core style, but they understand that they have to have a variety of striking, grappling, even weapons, self-defense, sport, right? We have to broad base because this thing we call martial arts is actually a very large thing. Now, look, if you're just trying to make money as a competitive athlete, you don't have to broad base at all. You just kind of pick the thing and focus on the core skills that do you there. But if you're doing this recreationally, if you're doing this for real life, and honestly, if you're going into MMA, you have to spread that base out quite a bit more. And one of the things that can help us in this is looking at some of the available statistics. Now, before we go on, we have to address a couple of things about the statistics. One is that just because the statistics show something being effective or dominant or whatever, doesn't necessarily tell us as much as we might think it does. As an offshoot to the naturalistic fallacy, saying that what is natural is automatically like good or valid or whatever, there is kind of the subgrouping of the is-ought fallacy, and the is-ought fallacy basically says because something is, it must be, and that is just kind of not exclusively true. That does not actually support the argument in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't mean that what is isn't the ultimate answer, but simply saying because it is, it must be is not a valid way to argue it. So we have to be careful. Just because these statistics demonstrate something doesn't actually tell us what's optimal. It just tells us what is. Now, the next thing that we have to understand here is these statistics are generally correlated only for the UFC, right? So it is a very specific mixed martial arts competition. It does not reach across all martial arts competitions, and it certainly doesn't get into the granularities of some of the other things, right? And if we were to, previously we did the top 10 submissions for MMA. I mean, those are still UFC statistics. That's not really across all of MMA. Now, you can probably say that MMA is MMA, so if they're getting to the UFC and they're doing these things, it's probably going to be okay, and maybe that's true, but also maybe not. So you got to take it with some grain of salt because it is a fairly narrow sample size. So if you are willing to take those grains of salt, if you are willing to accept those risks, then we can move on here. So I will definitely give you the links down in the description of the video for these things because I do think that this is a valuable way to look at and kind of structure some of your curriculum, and for lack of a better term, your order of operations. So let's start with a few things, and these do come from a couple different sources, and like I said, they'll be linked. I'm not going to enumerate them here in the video. So one thing that we have to understand is that almost half of all UFC fights, we're just going to say MMA, I'm going to use them interchangeably, but understand UFC, but nearly half the fights go to decision. They're not even finished. And look, in my opinion, you guys have been around long enough. You know me. I am a win, lose, or draw kind of person. To me, if you did not get a definitive win, i.e., KO, TKO, ref stoppage, submission, you didn't finish the fight. So, points are for people who don't want to fight. Points are for people who want to play a game. So, right off the bat, almost half. And then, there's, fights get thrown out, DQs and, no contest and stuff like that. So you can say about half of the fights don't even finish. That's a shame, right? One, that either means people are so evenly matched that they just can't get up on each other, which is what we would like to believe. And then the other side is that people just might actually be bad at finishing things. And some of that might be an artifact of sport style training. Sport style training, because it is necessarily harm reduced, right? We change things for safety, and we don't necessarily practice many finishes in the gym because we can't necessarily do a lot of that because of injury risk. It could just be a training artifact of the fact that training has to be safer. Therefore, people are not very good at finishing fights. We don't know. It's just hypothesis. Now, if we take the remainder of those fights, the ones that are actually finished, nearly 2/3, about 63%, right? So 66% would be 2/3. About 63% are finished with striking. And that's pretty interesting. Now, unfortunately, the statistics never get much more granular than that. A little bit, right? They talk about like body, head, and leg striking. One site differentiates for kicking, but it doesn't necessarily always tell us like what happened in the clinch, what happened in ground and pound. They don't always enumerate things like that, so we don't really know. But we do know ground and pound is a fairly high percentage. We are starting to see a lot more stand-up finishes, which, as an aside, this is kind of interesting, right? And we'll get to this in a second, but we know that the majority of UFC champions, are grapplers, and we know that the UFC was built on this idea of grappling as the dominant thing, and that seems to be proven over and over and over again. So why are fights being finished with striking? And some of that could actually be the fact that if you have grappler versus grappler, they might be too evenly matched, and then so they have to start relying on other things that they think their opponent might be weak in, which might be striking. So in fact, striking might be dominant because grapplers are bad at striking. So you can see the ambiguity in these statistics. Now, 2/3, man, almost 2/3 are striking finishes. Now, here's something that's interesting, right? About 64% of the UFC champs up until 2018, you've all seen the graph. It was really popular a few years ago. It has not been updated since, and I'm not going to go through and dig through all the data and recreate it myself. I just don't see that as being a particularly fruitful thing because I don't see the trend changing that much in 4 years. But about 64% of UFC champs were grapplers. Right, and if you break that down out of the total, not out of the remainder, out of the total, 40% of the champs are wrestlers and about 24% are BJJ, right? So wrestling is the actual dominant style. Now, some of that could be the fact that because wrestling is an Olympic sport and a school sport, people start in wrestling very early, very young. So it's more common, even though BJJ has exploded in popularity, wrestling is a lot more common, and a lot of people will attribute that as their core style or their fundamental base, which is what they're talking about here. None of these are one-dimensional fighters. They are all skilled across a range of things, but some people tend more towards being wrestlers. Some people tend more towards their BJJ base. Some people tend more towards their boxing, kickboxing, karate base, whatever. So that's interesting. Now, right, 64%, which means that the other 36% are striking based. But the cool thing is that despite that particular chart breaking it up into boxing, Muay Thai, kickboxing, karate, and I think Taekwondo, despite all of that, almost half. It was 12 versus 13, right? So 12 out of 25, almost half were boxing based. That's pretty incredible. But there's an interesting statistic there that I think is quite relevant, and that's the fact that despite the fact that there are technically more people training kickboxing for MMA than just boxing, only about 15% of the landed strikes are kicks. Kicks are not, there's some really great kick knockouts. Kicks are not the easiest thing to land, especially meaningfully. And so if only about 15% of landed strikes are actually kicks, and these are people who train kicking, That's an interesting stat. Now, I would like to see that difference, say, in like K1 or any of the other kickboxing promotions or whatever. I'd like to see what their stats are, and I haven't dug around to look at that because that might be different then, because it takes a lot off the table. But that is it's a really interesting statistic, because if you're sitting here going, well, only about 15% of the landed strikes are kicks, that means that 85% are hand strikes, which, is honestly, like, considering what we are as animals, we're extremely handsy creatures. So it makes sense that boxing would be your base. Here's the other cool thing about boxing, because boxing is so stripped down and simplified. In a sense, refined is the right word, but it carries connotations that might make you think something that it doesn't mean. But in a sense, boxing is extremely refined. And because of that, right, because of the simplicity, you get to spend a lot of time just working on these basic tactics and how to get in, get out, change angle, use your footwork, use pressure, use evasion, right? It's one of these, like, really, all the fat has been cut out, here's just some nutrition kind of things. It is a really fantastic base. And that's really what I want to get to with today's video, is this concept of, like, as far as striking goes, no matter what you do, boxing is so incredibly important. And I want you to think of it this way. When you look at all of the kickboxing styles, and I'm including traditional martial arts in that, because most of these guys doing traditional martial arts are still using kickboxing sparring. Most of them are not training in the traditional manner, because most of these traditional arts are not really meant for sport, and they don't have a lot of the toolbox, so they still have to use kind of kickboxing sparring to make it work. And so when you really dig in and look at this, all right, so my kickboxing background outside of the traditional martial arts is savate. And I mean, obviously I had to train with other kickboxers for MMA, but that's training with people and picking up tips. That's not actually studying an art, right? For me, the studied art was savate. And savate was an interesting street fighting, primarily kicking art that also involved French, upper body wrestling and, perhaps some less civilized tactics. And supposedly a lot of open hand striking. They added English boxing to make it better. Right? Now, this is the bare knuckle era, but they added English boxing to make it better, right? The kicking was good, but it wasn't enough. They needed the boxing to take it to the next level. Let's look at American kickboxing, right? Because we think of American kickboxing a lot when we say kickboxing, because that's kind of where the term comes from. And American kickboxing, well, that's the brainchild of Joe Louis, who had gotten tired of the point karate circuit, hooked up with Bruce Lee. They started training a lot of boxing stuff, fell really in love with boxing. And Joe Louis was like, I'm not going back to the point karate stuff. Finally, a point karate organization was like, hey, we're having a tournament. Can you come out and do this? He's like, I'll only do it if we strap on the gloves and go at it for real. And they said, okay. And they found him a guy and they fought, and one of the commentators called it kickboxing, and thus American kickboxing was born. It was basically boxing rules, but with additional kicks. And it was cool, right? It created this whole thing. And so when we look at kickboxing, right, kickboxing is just traditional karate mostly, but kung fu guys were doing it too. Don Wilson was a kung fu guy. And they were adding American boxing or Western boxing to their karate and kung fu. So that's what kickboxing is, right? It's boxing plus traditional martial arts, largely just their additional kicking. Okay, so that's that. Then we go to, let's say, Muay Thai. Well, Muay Thai was a completely different beast until like the 1930s. It looked a lot more like, say, karate, a lot more like, say, Southern Kung Fu, before they added Western boxing to it to make it what it is today. Western boxing turned Muay Thai into what it is today. And of course, Dutch kickboxing is that plus, Western kickboxing, Muay Thai, and Kyokushin. We also know that because of the French presence in Japan, they influenced, at least to some degree, maybe not a large degree, but to some degree, the Sabat sport influenced Japanese competition, not necessarily the base arts, but the competition style. And in a sense, you can say that by proxy, English boxing gets thrown in there. And then if you go up to, say, Russia for Sambo, Sambo was predominantly judo, and then they added, catch and savate and some like military gutter fighting stuff. And again, we have that savate connection and boxing. You look at Chinese Sanda. Chinese Sanda was created essentially by the Kuomintang, who they were, which by the way, Ip Man was an officer in, right? Wing Chun is associated with all that. They created Sanda to basically replace the old Lei Tai challenge matches. And Sanda took Western martial arts techniques, which by that point were largely boxing, and adding it to their traditional martial arts, boxing plus kung fu. And so everywhere we look, everywhere we see kickboxing arts, we see the addition of English boxing. English boxing, traditional English boxing. And yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit biased towards the bare knuckle side of things, but the fact is that the English boxing, Western boxing, has influenced basically everything. And it has done so because that stripped down, fat-free, skim milk version of martial arts is actually such an essential component of everything that we do. It is a fantastic piece, and you have to be training it. No matter what else you do, you have to be training your boxing. Because, I mean, just because of all of this, and because of how much it has influenced everything else, like at the very least, you cannot be ignorant of it. Boxing is so incredibly important to what it is that we do. And it really, really helps you with your fight IQ. Again, because it is so refined, because it is so stripped down, it lets you get past a lot of the technique refinement that we see in the traditional arts and get right into the stuff that builds your fight IQ, which is actually a massively important part of this. Now, we can actually, just for the sake of argument here, we can actually go back to the other side of it, right, to the wrestling side of it. Because even though the difference between wrestling and BJJ isn't quite as big as the difference between boxing and kickboxing styles, the fact is that the wrestling is still dominating because it is that simplified, refined thing. BJJ is much more complex, takes much longer to get good at than basic wrestling does. And we all have heard the stories about, your D1 wrestler going into a BJJ school and as a white belt is cleaning up the colored belts. And it's not that he's fighting at black belt level. It's just that it has given him such a leg up. It's because he understands movement and contact and control and is used to competition. Like all of these things, again, it's fight IQ. He has built up so much fight IQ that he can kind of get in and start messing with the technical stuff because he's built up that fight IQ. We talked about this recently. Building up that fight IQ is so important. If you have that fight IQ, you can add all of these other pieces because the fight IQ tells you where they fit in the toolbox, what jobs they do, all of that stuff. And so what we really have to say about this is that your base on all of this stuff is really going to be boxing and wrestling. Now, are we going to say what specific kind of wrestling, what specific school of thought of boxing? No, I mean, that's going to, for the most part, the wrestling is going to be freestyle, but American folk style, which comes from catch wrestling, is extremely powerful as well. And folk style wrestlers tend to do really well on the Olympic stage. And, guys like Dan Severn were Greco-Roman wrestlers, and that gets you really good at the upper body stuff, which makes you good at hand fighting. And honestly, you add boxing to Greco-Roman and man, you've got a really good upper body game. So that's all fantastic stuff right there. And of course, because there's no gi in MMA, training without a gi is going to be a little more specific to the game. That's a slightly different argument for another time, but it's not nothing. So when we look at this stuff, right, we really do need to be thinking about, one, we need to be thinking about what our core competencies are, right? And I think we can see that our core competencies really need to be our boxing and wrestling. And whatever that is, whatever that means, those are going to be the kind of basic things that help you build fight IQ and get you your core things that work time and time again. Then you can add your submissions and you can add your kicks, right? Submissions are good. Submissions are important. Kicks are good. Kicks are important, but they're not quite as important as the base core skills that conventional boxing and wrestling give you. And so when we look at this stuff, right, you can train everything. You absolutely should train everything. But if you get that core of boxing and wrestling, everything else kind of comes just a little bit easier, and it gives you such a leg up on learning everything else, because you end up not being too lost, as long as you don't go too far into the world of dogma, right? Because some people get lost in, this is the best thing ever and I'm just going to stop here. That's kind of like doing the 80-20 thing, right? Boxing and wrestling is your 80-20. In the MMA game, you still got another 20% of really high level refinement to do. It's just going to cost you a lot more to go through it. But the basic boxing and wrestling is going to get you most of the way there. And that is, oh man, that's such a powerful thing to know, right? So regardless of what kind of school you run, right? Maybe you run, a Taekwondo school. Maybe you run, a judo academy, whatever, right? Formulate your grappling and striking still around these concepts and add to them, right? Still work on those core competencies. Now, again, right, if you are stuck in, we're just doing this one sport and that's all we're good at, fine, that's fine. But don't make claims outside of that sport. But if we're looking at MMA, if we're looking at, real world, self-defense and combatives, then boxing and wrestling is kind of your baseline. And that's where we should be starting. And that's what we should be running through every time, right? Pin everything to those things. Develop that core and build on top of it. All right, I think I have rambled on enough. Again, check the links in the description and I will talk to you guys later. Good journey. Hey, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share, do all the other social media stuff. You can check out our other socials, as well as take a look at some of the merchandise that we have for offer in the links below. And if you happen to be in the Phoenix metro area, stop in, come in for a class, come in just to say hi. We'd love to meet you. Until next time, good journey.